we are moving into the launch of Dominique Heck's second edition of After Cage. So let me just share the image here on the screen. There is, and I'll wave to the beautiful edition of the book, which I'm sure Marion will be talking about later, Dominique's After Cage, a serial composition in word and movement on time and silence. I mean, you can't help but read that as poetry, can you? It just begs it. So let me just say a few words from the point of view of Liquid Amber Press before I hand over to Marion to launch it. So Liquid Amber Press are absolutely delighted tonight to be launching this second edition of Dominique Heck's innovative, bold poem, After Cage. Poetry is a wonderfully broad church, as I'm sure we've noticed even tonight, in terms of its themes, its styles, its preoccupations, and of course the poets themselves who do the writing. Heck's work brings us challenge. It throws open conventional expectations of what poetry might be and what kinds of voices and structures it might use to engage us as readers, or to blow us out of the water, as the case might be. It startles us, this poetry startles us out of any comfortable sense of meaning, using tools of language and languages, spacings on the page, textual variations, metaphor, association, etc., all those good things, to catapult us into a destabilising territory of silence, speech, mortality, and raw energy. So buckle up as we move into Dominique's work. This After Cage piece was first published in 2018 by Girls on Key Press, and you might know that Girls on Key have not continued their publishing arm. So by reprinting this second edition, which is new and improved, of After Cage, Liquid Amber Press keeps this really important and provocative work in print, and has also given us, and Dominique, I think, an opportunity to renew and revisit its poetics of limit, rhythm, embodiment, and the power of language. As the title, After Cage, implies, Heck's work takes as its key motif the famous experimental compositions of John Cage, to explore within the art form of music, as he did, the bewildering relation between silence on the one hand and the possibilities of articulation. The epigraph which Heck uses from Cage describes his experimental art in this way. He says, to compose a piece of uninterrupted silence. It will open with a single idea which I will attempt to make as seductive as the colour and shape and fragrance of a flower. The ending will approach imperceptibility. Beauty, the abyss, the rhythms of the body, the potential for poetry to enable us to see ourselves and the world we operate in differently. It's all here in Heck's own astounding serial composition in word and movement on time and silence. So tonight I'd like to warmly welcome Melbourne poet and academic Marion May Campbell. I'm sure Marion's known to many of you here tonight, to launch this second edition of After Cage. Marion's own works, of which there are numerous, but her recent works include the poetry collection Languish, which came out with Upswell just this year, and Third Body from Whitmore Press in 2018, and the memoir of her father, The Man on the Mantelpiece, with UWAP. Marion lives in Druin on unceded Gurnai land. So I'll stop sharing. I'll find Marion, and I'm going to, where are you, Marion? You've unmuted yourself, and I'm going to spotlight you so that you can begin.
Dominique going to read first?
Pauline's saying, was Dominique going to read first? And yes, indeed she was, of course. Thank you. All right, I'm going to remove my own spotlight, and I'm going to pop Dominique in. Yes, of course she is, so that we can get a bit of a flavour. I'll add Dominique in here. Whoop, where are you, Dominique?
I'm here.
You're here, okay. All right, so we've got Dominique there, and I want to, now, Marion, where did you go again? I'm trying to add you in as well. So we've got both of you, fantastic. But Dominique, you're going to read for us first, sorry about that. And I'll put the words on the screen so that people can see the layout, the territory of your poetry as you're performing it for us. So let me go back to that, and over to you, Dominique.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you to Pauline as well for this wonderful production. And I want to say thank you to Brendan Bonsack, who took the photograph at the launch of the first edition of After Cage, which now features as the cover of the book. So I'll read from the opening. This old land recedes from us until it starts to take place among historical figments, metaphors, myths, not reality, but a haunting dream. The land's morphological envelope. An extraordinary tangle of rumors, whispers with grave relevance when you watch the sun swoop on political abstractions, settlement, commission, protocol, migration, entropy, terror, charter, right. There is nothing to hold it but the wind. The plane bobs up, down, swings from left to right, lurches forward, ascends like an albatross. We are airborne. In reality, we are not born of air at all, just carried through it. In flight, suspended between life and death, like so many numbers bracketed off by the laws of algebra, dots usurping entropy, the alphabet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Over to you, Marion.
Okay, Rose, thank you so much for your introduction. And may I begin by congratulating Liquid Amber, Rose and Pauline for this magnificent production, which honors the brilliance of Dominique's writing. It's a really beautiful material artifact to celebrate a magnificent sustained poem. And I'd love to seize this chance to celebrate Dominique's extraordinary creative practice throughout her many works of fiction, poetry, performance, literary theory, poetics, criticism, always exploring the limits of writing, the extreme terrain in which it finds no sure foothold, no readily or readily pre-mapped topography. It's staggering to consider the phenomenal protean proliferation of Dominique's output to date, available on Liquid Amber's website. There's a list of her works there. This is a writing practice which probes interrogatively and disarmingly questions key aspects of contemporary culture, a writing that constantly reinvents itself, never nosing its prow smugly into a mooring preceding it, but dreaming up new modes of reader navigation or hijack via the text as a set of interrogative dice throws into the unknown. And I use that Mallarméan term because there's much in Dominique's practice that reminds us of that great experiment of Malame's un coup de dé, throw the dice. On edge and hair on fire, she feels for the edges of genre. Those are Dominique's words. Her practice is marked from the beginning by this acute recognition of the productive instability of the human subject. Its re-inflection through linguistic refraction from language to language, register to register, genre to genre, and the sheer exhilaration of its hijacking by unconscious forces. To make oneself vulnerable to these seemingly random eruptions from the unconscious takes great courage, but the rewards here are immense, as is testified by such recent works preceding After Cage, Tracks, Hush, Chaosmos, Smacked, along with the wonderful influential works of scholarship, like Towards the Poetics of Creative Writing. Everywhere Dominique's work suggests to me that if we can make ourselves over as corporeal subjects through a staging of intense affectivity, igniting and transmuting the image field, then we can also transfigure our culture at large. Like James Joyce, as celebrated by such feminist thinkers as Hélène Cixous, Dominique riffs and runs in multidimensional and polyglot puns. And I'm thinking here of the beautiful Chaosmos, which is intimately linked to After Cage in many ways, even reprising some little phrases, exploiting, like Mallarmé, the gutter margins of the page, that abyss of darkness marking the spinal fold, between the pages, using vertical and anagrammatic encodings to counter the horizontal movement of the text, or to make it veer into new dimensions. Along with their emotional power, the beauty of these experiments derives from the dynamic improvisational energies of language being activated into wild dance, then pulled back into pattern by formal constraints, whence they are recharged and again released. Whether these constraints operate through fugal repetition, via word clusters, sound sequences, or image constellations. Always deeply empathetic and wildly inventive, this is a writing of the wound too, of the abyss cut through the psyche, the howl beyond language. Of the generation of the poem, and especially of this present poem, the second edition of After Cage, Dominique writes in Uncaged, poeming, choreographing, dancing, a beautiful essay which I highly recommend to you. A poem begins as an inner disturbance, the loss of equilibrium that impels rhythm. In this proprioceptive moment, which may be conceived of as a disturbance of primal unity, I become restless, unable to settle or focus. Myself is a caged animal and it begins to pace inside its cage. The best thing would be to walk off this inner disturbance. And that essay is in Axon, if you want to look it up, Creative Explorations. So it begins with a loss of equilibrium, impelling rhythmic departures, an incipient blood beat felt subcutaneously through the feet, subsequently under the tissue of the page, as it were. Here's a further investigation of silence and a choreography born of it, a scanning of the text to come, its subtle pulse, its rhythmic dreaming. If dance is a sounding of the pre-linguistic body between falling and flying, here a mothering silence is sounded stethoscopically through the body-mind for its latent music, a score to incite via the now more insistent rhythm of the dance to come, whereby new sites of dreaming might take place. And I'd just like to segue into our Q&A session straight away, if that's okay, Rose and Pauline. So Dominique, for you as choreographer and performer of After Cage, the poem and its incipient music is very much a spatial art, I think.
Yes, literally so, Marian. The poem was conceived during a dance workshop, which started with bodies free associating in space. so to speak. And I realized that, of course, not being a dancer, the dance patterns were produced by the collision between inner space and outer space, also by my intention and another's intention, by absence and presence, imagination and memory. So I tried to translate that into language. You could say that the poem is made of a literal that sort of falls back upon itself, and it's rhythm that actually propels the text, not the other way around.
Mm. That's most intriguing. And you said somewhere that dancing the poem at the launch of the first version felt like an emptying out of subjectivity.
Yes, it was. There was a dissociation of consciousness going on there. And I tried to explode this in the revisions I brought about in the second edition.
I see. So that emptying out of subjectivity, does that prepare then you in that creative space to host the haunting, which you say it all begins with?
Yes, I think you are right to say that an emptying of subjectivity induces a propensity to listen in both the act of composition, but even more so in the act of revision. And for me, this was enhanced by the experience of dancing with a choreographer and a dancer, and of course an audience. That was an exhilarating experience and most unsettling experience too. So it entailed a kind of dissociation of consciousness, as I said, and a formal process of erasure, whereby associative rhythm dictated a textual repatterning. I ended up discarding all punctuation and margins in the text as I was revising. And then, of course, I put some order back into that chaos. So it was messy.
No, that's wonderful. And, as someone who was privileged to attend that performance of dance, it was mesmerizing. It really was. I won't forget it. Maybe you could share that experience of translating the dance then, the rhythms explored, the space choreographed into the extended silent, or if you like, latent music of the poem, the silent music of the poem.
Well, you could say that the experience itself was very much an event of the body, by which I mean that I bracketed off consciousness, and that was done almost unconsciously because there was an interaction with the person with whom I was dancing, and also responding to the to the audience. That is to the extent to which one can say that it is possible to bracket off consciousness, but the rhythms explored were lived rhythms, and the spaces choreographed were actually dictated by sequences of numbers. So there was a rigidity to that patterning when I was writing, which was then revisited and modified in the act of revision. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I suppose this almost duplicates what you've said, but how was your process influenced by Cage's own poetics of music and techniques of generation?
Well, during that workshop, we'd been listening to Stockhausen and exploring this, the structural aspects of his work. And I was frustrated during rehearsal because I thought it was too rigid. And one of the leaders of the workshop said, read Cage. So I I read John Cage's lectures on silence, and it struck me that though famous for his aleatory music, John Cage uses mathematical sequences to structure his work. And what I think he does actually is to exploit the tension between formal structure and chance operations to deconstruct the art of the fugue. And I had long been interested in the art of the fugue, as some of you might know from Hush, a fugue.
Yes.
And speaking about his later work, I'm going to read what he says. They begin anywhere, last any length of time. They are occasions for experience. So with this in mind, these two sentences are at the start of my poem. I could start anywhere in time and space. That is in a kind of dream space. And that's basically where it begins and takes you in real time to New York on a plane and back into the dream space.
Yes. Now this I realized that a lot of work went into the second edition. It is not just a reprint, it's a reworked poem. Could you explain some of those processes to us, Dominique?
Well, as I tried to explain earlier, I revisited the haunting through a dance space-time, if this makes sense. That is in order to fine-tune the text. In other words, I ghosted myself back into the experience of the dancing at the launch and tried to relive what had happened there. And of course, I had written an essay about the experience before, so all that becomes, enmeshed. And also Rose, my editor here, pointed out a couple of places where there was a lack of clarity, or maybe some words were, it could be even, rethought. So it was a process of fine editing. And I would say that it is still a work in progress. And I was stunned when I reread it to read that the key phrase for chaosmos crops up at the end of the poem, and I had totally forgotten that. So if that sums up,
yes, thank you. That was wonderful. I wouldn't mind focusing, if that's okay, on a couple of details, especially one from an extract that you read near the beginning of the poem. When you watch the sun swoop on political abstractions, settlement, commission, protocol, migration, terror, charter, right, entropy, I wonder if this montage of the material sun, alongside the series of political abstractions seen from the airborne perspective of fenced, stolen, and too often desecrated country, doesn't serve to rematerialize the abstract, activating each political abstraction back into the processes that are hidden behind masking bureaucratic lies, political lies, spotlighting again the active regimes of terror, of settlement, perpetrated through law and rights. And I just wondered, regarding this, might not the task of the poet be, as you see it, to crack open these abstractions, laying bare the singularity of concrete embodied experience that they hide?
Well, I hadn't thought of that at all, Marion, to be honest, but I think that's what I was trying to do intuitively. I started writing the poem at a time of personal trouble for me. I mean, I was troubled what was going on in the geopolitical sphere. I mean, Trump had just started his his term, and I was troubled by what was going on in Australia at the time, and I was deeply troubled by nomination and what I was doing as a poet, not even being an Australian. So that's where that's the emotional source of this poem. Yeah.
Yes, I think it comes across very powerfully. It is a very powerful emotional experience to read it. And I note the pun, even though the pages are unnumbered here, but I think it's about page 8. And you've got mère, which is French for mother, and mere. The word is operating both as mother and mere substitution. And I thought these implications were fascinating and complex. So I have 2 questions here. Is there always substitution of the father for the mother in the relentless temporal order in which we live, of Chronos, or time swallowing his children, querens quem devoret, as Lacan says, looking for someone to devour? So in relation to this, do we take writing is birthed by death, in the sense that we write against time gobbling us, each poem, each story framed by the energizing fact of our mortality?
Very much so. I think, well, I suppose the pun has to be understood in a Lacanian framework. So when the lore of the father is tempered with, we are in the time of the mother, whose desire is to gobble up her progeny. So I'd agree with your interpretation that we write against time gobbling us, that each poem or story is framed by the energizing fact of our mortality. Yeah.
If we take time, I'm quoting from you, as an empty space, are we then open to productive chance operations whereby we can escape time?
Yes, we trump time with a capital letter, so to speak, and no pun is intended here. Yeah. Yeah.
The curlicue, it fascinated me, seemed to me a most productive inseminator, if you like, or germinative motif in the field of this poem. As an ornamentation on the letter, it sows for me something like a Baroque figure, an unpredictable and playful, ludic sprouting, as if music in n dimensions were possible, the letter becoming an entanglement in matter, the curlicue inscribing the mattering of writing, driving light off course, which is a phrase from your poem. Could you tell us something then, at which point this coming to rhythm, coming to score the dance, does the image event occur for you? And if the image is more a becoming, a metamorphic moment than an arrival for you?
The image of the curlicue is a kind of processual accident, actually. It arrived by free association, and it arrived rhythmically rather than linguistically, with sound superseding sign, if you mean. I was not consciously, but I was actually working against meaning, funnily enough. So, and other associations aggregated in a similar ludic fashion. And I like your term, coming to rhythm. That's exactly what was happening. It was the jubilation of the child in the playground of language, or what Lacanians call la langue. So I've been exploring that space in poetry recently. Yeah.
So to kind of not to finish things at all, but to open them out again, how do you know, Dominique, when the poem has found a form respecting the aleatory, the stochastic, the random that we've been talking about, those chance elements, yet creating as an aeroplane does before its descent to the tarmac, avoiding crash landing, which you invoke in the poem, a holding pattern. How do you know you've got this tension between a holding pattern and things flying apart?
It's a feeling. It's a feeling, Marion. I mean, I know that there is an intellectual sort of background to my practice, and that so I used to be a lot more controlling of my material, but now I let the feeling sort of happen, and in that sense, it is always provisional. So I suspect that After Cage is still a work in progress.
A very wonderful that's testimony to its ongoing creativity, and it will, no doubt, have numerous becomings in all our minds as we spend time with it. Thank you so much. I turn things over to Rose again.
Thanks very much, Marion. What a wonderful conversation and launch. I think Emily, you might have said this is like being at an amazing poetry masterclass. So thank you for sharing your ideas, so generatively with us, as you said. But we're not quite done yet. I'd like to hear a little bit more from Dominique. So let me put some slides up, and we'll hear another section. Can you see that, Dominique?
I'm back to the slides.
Yeah, can you see that in the path?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, over to you.
In the path of the shooting star, frozen in its path, I shatter into a million cilia, feathering, speed and dynamics, tonic core of a now silent chorus. How the dark shimmers and heaves, dropped dots, canticles, letters, reconfigure. I flew too close to the sun, toppled from an empty sky, crashed in a sea of rubble, body parts, blood, everywhere letters, not feathers, litter the ground. Hardly newsworthy, you'd say, blind to the possibilities of calligraphy. Everywhere facts, fictions born on the ruins of our certainties. In New York, a real press releases Farewell to Arms, sci-fi. In Moscow, polonium-proof angels rehearse the Firebird. In Istanbul, a journalist is strung up by the feet. In Doha, clerks draft climate deals varying the Kyoto Protocol. In Delhi, a girl locks her door before being raped. In Outback Australia, a man guns down his wife. On the shores of Bass Strait, dolphins die in mass stranding as satellites picture tunneling at Mount Mantap. In London, a teenager denies plotting acts of terrorism as police shoot at a truck of Kurdish migrants across the Channel. In Paris, Messiaen turns his brittle bones into grave fugues. In Reykjavik, a panicked public servant takes his life. In St. Louis, a rock singer cries, "I'm gonna die," and rises. In Dhaka, refugees flood from new monsoon deserts. In Melbourne, property developers cash in on students. In Perth, a poet types erasures with one finger. In the midst of scenarios designed for our extinction, I'm lettering the world and telling you nothing. On the dead body of the earth, I'm finally driven to imaging where machines weld dreams to the living dead. Letters are engraved at the back of my wasted eyes. An MRI, radioactive material digs my veins as east and west gamble with nuclear arms, and the Minotaur wins the Nobel for peace. And chronology proves to be time and time again a fallacy. An automated orderly wheels me to ground zero through dark and cold labyrinthine corridors. What the eye can't see, alone with the dark, hubris shattered. I am speechless, auto-propelled. Hear the slow horror coursing through my sunburned veins.
Thank you so much, Dominique. I wondered if you had finished on the I am speechless. It might have been a prophetic moment. But thank you again so much, Marion, for your really inspiring launch tonight. So insightful. And of course, Dominique, thank you for the energy and the insights, the importance of your work. And Liquid Amber are very pleased, as I said, to be keeping this work amongst us. It's really, really wonderful to have it out there. I'm interested for you to say it's a work in progress. I mean, perhaps everything is a work in progress, but I see a third edition. Who knows?